Okay, hello everyone. Go on. The Silk Road was very important to the story of the Polo family and their journey to China. But the Silk Road wasn't just one large road, it was a number of different routes, often with smaller roads at the side to places that were good for trade. Yes. One of the most famous Silk Road routes went from Xi'an in eastern China to Kashgar in western China, then through Samarkand in Central Asia and Baghdad in the Middle East, and finished at cities on the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. The Silk Road began in the 2nd century BC, but of course it didn't stay the same over the centuries. Different routes sometimes became more important than others because of new trade or fighting in some areas. One surprising thing about the Silk Road is its name. People often think that the name is many hundreds of years old, but this is not true. The German traveler Ferdinand von Richthofen first used the word Silk Road in the 19th century to describe the different routes from China to Europe. The name is from the most famous thing to come from China, silk. Silk was one of the most important trade goods. It was very valuable in Europe, and the merchants could carry it easily on their horses to camels. Silk was as valuable as gold, and traders often used it as money to buy spices or other goods. At this time, people made silk into beautiful carpets, clothes, shoes, and pictures. Trade goods were not the only things that came along. The Silk Road. Important new ideas and religions moved with people too. Buddhism traveled from India to China along the Silk Road, and the people later brought ideas out of China how to make paper and gunpowder, for example. Modern tourists can now visit parts of the Silk Road by train, bus, or plane. But of course, journeys at the time of Marco Polo were a lot slower. Merchants traveled about 40 kilometers on a very good day, but under 20 kilometers on a bad day. Travelers like the Polos often rode on horses or camels. Large Bactrian camels were best when you had to cross high mountains like the Pamirs uh, in Central Asia. These strong animals could live with the sudden changes from hot to cold on those difficult parts of the Silk Road. After a long day, travelers usually stopped at a caravanserai, a palace where travelers could stay. Visitors could find food, drink, and somewhere to sleep there. It was a good place to meet other travelers too, and perhaps find a new caravan to journey with. Merchants also talked late into the night there and sometimes learned important news about roads. or markets in the area. The caravanserais often had one large door for all the people and the camels to go through. There were big walls all around the place, which protected travelers from thieves and the dangerous animals at night. A lot of caravanserais were just small rooms made from stone, and the visitors slept on the cold floor. But in some of the bigger towns and the cities, there were large. This one caravanserai. Were large and beautiful caravanserais. After a hard day on the road, tired travelers could find a bed, a bath, and a market with fine food when they stopped there. Some of the larger caravanserais were in famous places on the Silk Road like Bukhara or Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan. These cities were made rich by traders from across Asia and Europe. There are still many beautiful buildings there, like the Bibi Hanum Mosque in Samarkand and the Midi Arab Madrasah in Bukhara. You can still stay in a caravanserai today, but these places are now nice, comfortable hotels with showers, televisions, and restaurants for the modern tourists on the Silk Road. Yes, this one. Marco leaves Venice. Soon after, Nicola and the Maffeo returned to Venice in 1269. They planned their return to China. The Polos didn't just need the food, clothes, and the money for a long journey. They also needed the oil from Jerusalem and the 100 priests to take to Kublai Khan. This time, the brothers took young Marco with them. As the son of an important merchant, he needed to learn to travel and trade. In 1271, they left Venice and sailed east across the Mediterranean Sea to the city of Accra. In Accra, they immediately looked for the Ubaldo of Picenza. He was an important man who worked for the Pope, and Nicola and the Maffeo knew him already. The Ubaldo said that the Polos could go and get the special oil from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but there was one big problem. The Poles wanted to take 100 priests to China, and only the Pope could agree to this. But at this time there was no Pope. People were waiting for a new one. So the three travelers decided to get the special oil first. But when they returned to Accra, there was still no news about the Pope. They became tired of waiting, so they left Accra without any priests and began their long journey. But they soon got a message from the Ubaldo. They must return to Accra at once, and there they learned some surprising news. The Ubaldo of Picenza himself was the new Pope, Pope Gregory X. He sent the Polos on their journey with letters for Kublai Khan and 2 priests, but not 100. The travelers needed to go to the town of Hormuz, where they could find a ship to China, but their long journey began badly. The two priests became frightened by stories about fighting on other parts of the road, and they turned back to Accra. What could the Polos do now? They didn't want to go home, of course, so they continued without their priests. The men went on their long journey to Hormuz, through countries that we now know as Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, Iraq, and Iran. Marco later wrote about his travels there here in the description of the world. As a merchant, he often described the interesting goods in markets along the route. In Turkomania, now Armenia, he was excited to find the best and handsomest carpets in the world. He also talked of the fine silk here in many bright and beautiful colors. Further on the journey, Marco heard stories about black oil. The oil came out of a hole in the ground and the people burned it in small lights or put it on their skin when they were ill. We now think that Marco was describing the oil fields of Baku in Azerbaijan. Oil still comes from the Baku area today. The Poles moved down to the town of Mosul and then to Baghdad. In the huge markets here, Marco found expensive carpets, valuable silk, and fine clothes with wonderful pictures of birds and animals on it. Next, the travelers journeyed across Persia, modern-day Iran, to the city of Kerman. Then they moved south through the area of the Karaunas, a dangerous group of thieves and murderers. In this area, the Poles traveled with a caravan to protect themselves. But one day, there was a terrible sandstorm, and the Karaunas came out from behind rocks and fought the travelers. Likely, the Poles escaped, but the Karaunas took many other people from the caravan and sold them. In the end, the men arrived in Hormuz and looked at the Arab boats they called the house. For the next part of the journey, they hoped to find ships made from wood and nails like the ones in Venice, but where were the nails? In the house, these boats were only made from wood and rope, and they didn't look very strong. What could the travelers do now? The answer was a difficult one. They needed to turn around and make the long journey to China by land on the Silk Road. From Hormuz to Khanbalch, the Poles left the sea and traveled back near to Kerman. But they had a very long journey in front of them. The travelers now needed to move quickly. Surely Hulai Khan was thinking about them and waiting for their return. After Kerman Marco later described their ride across the large salt desert of Dasht Lut in the east of modern-day Iran. The water here was dark green and very salty, and it was impossible to drink. The three men traveled further east to the area of Khorasan and then on to Badakhshan in modern-day Afghanistan. Marco talked excitedly about the rich jewels here. People found large rubies and valuable silver deep in the mountains near this town. Then Marco suddenly became very ill. Nicola and Maffeo stopped and waited for him to get better. But the months went past and Marco still couldn't travel. After nearly a year, the brothers took him up into the high Pamir mountains, away from the desert. Marco got well, and the Polos could begin to move once again. How things were different in high mountains area. It was a lot more difficult to cook things because fires didn't burn well. He also saw some unusual sheep here with very long, round horns. Today we know these sheep as Marco Polo sheep. From the Pamirs, the Polos joined down into Chinese Turkestan and they stopped at different cities like Kashgar and Khotan along the Silk Road. The Polos continued to the east and then came to the famous town of Lop. Lop was an important place for travelers from many different countries. They needed to stop here and buy food, drink, and strong camels to cross the dangerous desert of Lop, a part of the larger Gobi Desert. In the description of the world, Marco wrote about the dangers of the long journey across this desert. There were strong sun winds that came from now here, bringing and across the narrow roads and hiding the road from travelers. Marco Polo ship. There were also stories of strange music and the voices that called travelers' names again and again. Sometimes travelers walked away from their caravans to follow the voices and died alone in the middle of now here. People now think that this strange music is made by the wind moving through the sand. After months of traveling through the desert, the men arrived safely in Sachou, the city of sands, now modern-day Dunhuang in China. They were 3 years into their journey, but they still needed to travel further. The Poles then moved to the town of Kanchou and traded there for some months. But Kublai Khan heard news of the 3 travelers and he sent his soldiers to find and help them. The soldiers rode for 40 days to meet the Poles and then brought them back through the north of China to Shangdu, the Han's summer palace. It was now May 1275, nearly 4 years since the Poles left Venice. We can imagine that they were all very excited, but perhaps a little worried too. Nicola and Maffeo once said to Kublai Khan that they would come back with 100 Christian priests, but they returned with just one person, and of course, he wasn't a priest, he was young Marco Polo. The Gobi Desert. At the court of the Khan, Kublai Khan and all his most important men were waiting for the three travelers in his summer palace at Shangdu. Marco later gave us a wonderful description of their conversation with the famous ruler. When the soldiers first brought the Polos to the Khan, they immediately sat in front of him and looked down at the floor. The Khan was very happy to see them again, and he asked them to stand up at once. The brothers then gave him the special letters from Pope Gregory and the oil from Jerusalem. He was very happy with these presents, and he began to ask the brothers all about their long journey and also for news of the Pope. Nicola and Maffeo talked for a long time and explained all about their problems with the priests. The Khan listened silently to their story, and in the end, he understood everything. After this important conversation, the Khan then saw Marco. He was standing behind his father and the uncle. "Who is this young man?" asked the Khan, and Marco came nearer to him. "That is your servant and my son," said Nicola. "He is welcome and it pleases me much," replied the Khan, and he then asked the travelers to have a special meal with him. The Khan welcomed the Polos into the daily life of his court. After his long journey, Marco looked with surprise at the many different things all around him. There was a big park with large numbers of the Khan's animals. He had over 300 of the most handsome birds and a group of snow-white horses. In the middle of the park, there was a huge tent with more than 200 silk ropes to hold it up. This was the center of the summer court. "It's the most wonderful thing in the world," wrote Mark later. "It looked like a strong building, but the huntsman could easily move it to a different place when necessary." In December, the Khan moved the court to his winter place at Khanbalak. Marco was interested to see this. Famous city. It was built in a square with high walls all around. Each side of the city was just under 10 kilometers long, and there were 12 huge doors with 1,000 soldiers at each one. The roads were long and clean, very different from the narrow streets of Venice. At the center was the famous winter palace with hundreds of rooms for the Khan and his 4 wives. Each wife had more than 10,000 servants. Oh my God. About 10,000 servants. There were large numbers of different workers in Hanbalik, each with a special area of the city. Marco was very interested in the people who made the Han's famous paper money. They made the paper from special trees and they carefully put red and black writing onto it to make it into money. At court, Mark became a favorite with Kublai Khan because he was a clever young man and a wonderful storyteller. He learned to read and write Mongol and four other languages. He was also very interested in how the Han ruled his people. The Han soon knew that Marco could be very useful to him. There were many different groups of people in his huge empire, and he needed someone to visit and watch them. So he gave Marco an important job. He became the Han's ambassador to different parts of the empire. In 1275, the Han sent Marco, now aged 21, on his first journey. Up to then, Marco always traveled with Nicola and Maffeo, but now they stayed in Hanbalik and traded. Could the young traveler be successful without his father and the uncle at his side? Working for the Han. Marco knew that his first journey for the Han was very important, so he wrote down careful descriptions of everything on his route. The people, the buildings, and the different places. When he returned, he told Kublai Khan all about them, and this, of course, pleased the great ruler very much. For the next 17 years, Mark worked for the Han in his huge empire, and the two men became like father and son. The Han gave Mark a special gold passport, and he could then move freely about the Mongol Empire, just like his father and uncle years before. On his journeys for the Han, Marco wore fine clothes and traveled with a large number of servants. He was now a very important man. Receiving the gold passport. Congratulations. One of Marco's favorite cities was Kinsai, modern-day Hangzhou, in the east of China. He often visited this place near the sea, and he later wrote many pages about it. Like Venice, Kinsai was a large city on the water. It had 12,000 bridges, and some of these were very high. Arab or Persian ships could easily go under the bridge to come into the city. Kinsai had 12 groups of special workers. Some groups made silk clothes. Others made things of silver or gold, and each group had 12,000 buildings with 30 to 40 workers in each one. These clever people made everything necessary for life in the city, from wonderful clothes to valuable blades. Marco was very interested in the hundreds of bath houses in Kinsai. People here had a bath 3 times a month, a lot more often than in Europe. The man and the woman on inside washed with very cold water, but they kindly gave visitors from other places warm water for their baths. Bath, not baths, bath. One of Marcus' many journeys for the Han took him down to Southeast Asia and to the countries that we now know as Myanmar and Vietnam. He described the lives of the people here. In one area, he saw people who painted large rings on the skin around their arms and legs. They also had handsome gold teeth. In a different place, he found men and a woman with pictures of animals and birds all over their bodies. In the city of Mian, he saw two tall buildings which were made for famous dead ruler. One building had thick gold all over it, and the other thick silver. Each one had a gold ball at the top with small bells all around it. These bells moved with the wind and made wonderful music. Early Chinese gold. Yes, Chinese gold. That's enough for today, guys. Thank you for watching this part 2.